About a year ago, I finished the biggest art project I've ever done. Over the course of 6 months, I made 26 illustrations of flowers based in a fantasy world, all documented and drawn by a witch named Hetty. I've always wanted to put a face behind the person who's discovered these flowers, and so over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be designing that character and making a character sheet for her. Let's jump into it. Hey, my name is Jade, and I like to paint with pixels. To give a bit of backstory on the character we're designing, Hetty is a young witch in training who grew up with her grandma Brea in the forest. Her grandma told her everything she knows about witchcraft and natural remedies and medicines. From a young age, Hetty loved to draw and would copy the flowers from her grandma's journals, and around the home. Grandma Brea used to tell her stories about all the adventures she went on discovering these flowers, but unfortunately, due to her old age, she can't travel very far anymore. So, Hetty and her cat companion Vin have been out on an adventure to document the flowers all around Azura. She's been drawing and journaling the flowers that she discovers to put in a book that she can then send to her grandma and bring the flowers of Azura back to her. I'll be honest, I was a bit intimidated by the thought of designing an entire character, so I actually started smaller with some studies of different hairstyles first. It's something that I wanted to try and draw ever since I started drawing portraits in last week's video. I got a few references from Unsplash of different hairstyles to explore. I didn't have too much planned with her visuals. The only thing that I really knew is that I wanted to have curly hair, but I wasn't sure yet if it was going to be loose curls or a tighter curl pattern. I think this helped explore the overall shape language that I wanted to have, which was rounder features to give a more friendly vibe. You'll see the same shapes used with her accessories like her glasses later on. The hairstyle that felt most like her was actually sort of similar to my PNG tuber's hair, but a lot longer. I don't know why, I think it reflects her personality of being quite outgoing and a very curious person. It ties in quite nicely to when she was young. She was always excited to hear Grandma Brea's sort of insight about flowers that she didn't understand, and wasn't afraid to ask people to help solve that curiosity. Even if it was someone that she didn't know that were just going to visit Grandma Brea for something, if Hetty heard something that she was interested in but didn't understand, she wouldn't be afraid to just go up to that person and ask about it, even at a young age. And I quite like that about her. I wish I was more like that. Next, I moved on to accessories, and in particular the hat. The only thing that I knew is that I wanted it to be quite big, and also wanted it to not be too structured. I tried one hat where the point of the hat was a lot more stood up, but it looked a bit too new. I wanted it to feel a bit more worn in, sort of like it was passed down from her grandma, and it had a lot of wear in it. It sort of lost all of its structure and it flooped over at one side. I couldn't quite get the angle right at first, and I kept drawing it at the wrong perspective. For some reason I kept drawing it so it was almost leaning forward. And I had a bit of trouble finding specifically which hats for references. What I found was quite useful instead was to use sun hats for at least the brim of the hat because they are already quite big and have a similar sort of structure to them. It's a lot easier to find a bunch of sun hats on like clothing websites and use those instead as a reference. I read somewhere, I can't remember where it was, but someone mentioned that conductors who lead orchestras are great references for if you have like a wizard character who uses a wand, or tennis players are a good reference for posing characters with melee weapons, and I haven't tested that yet, but it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like finding slight variations to what you're looking for, but they're a bit more common, and it might help with finding references. I think Hetty likes to collect a lot of trinkets, and she's very sentimental about objects. I wanted to incorporate the idea around collecting a bunch of objects that mean a lot to her through her accessories, but I also didn't want to clutter the design too much. At one point I thought about having flowers and charms in her hair, as well as the hat, but we opted for just keeping them to the hat. And it's actually something that we'll be exploring a bit more next week with her outfit and accessories like her bags and belts. After I was happy with the design, I moved on to some expression studies, which was not the next best step to do, but we'll get into why a bit later. There were two main aims with the expression studies. The first was to practice a wider variety of expressions. I feel like with the studies that I've done of portraits recently, They've mostly been with a pretty neutral expression, so I wanted to explore more expressive emotions and get some practice in with a good range of those as well. I think Hetty is a pretty optimistic person, and a lot of the time she'd be pretty happy and smiley around others. I think it would be pretty rare to see her either really sad or really angry, unless it was something quite serious. I think that ties in nicely with the curious aspect of her personality as well. She's always someone who is keen to not resort to anger as a first reaction, and instead try to understand the situation from another perspective and try to find a solution there first, rather than getting angry at the situation. I also wanted to practice drawing the likeness of a character and trying to maintain consistency between drawings. I've done this in the past where I've taken one reference and then used the expression from other references to redraw the original reference in different expressions. And I found that really useful to do, so we're going to be doing that here as well. I'm pretty happy with how the expressions themselves turned out. I feel like they still look like Hetty between expressions and angles, but it did highlight a few aspects that I need to practice more. One thing I need to practice for sure is drawing the hat at different angles, because, oh man, especially in the grumpy expression, I could not get the hat right for the life of me. Mainly the brim of the hat. It also highlighted to me that when drawing eyes, and when they're sort of looking down so that the eyelids are showing, is also something that I need to practice a bit more. Because in the last expression, I was trying to have it so that she was looking down and deep in thought, but it was kind of hard to do, so I switched it so that she was looking up more inquisitively instead. Color tests are sort of where this whole process took a bit of a turn. I realized that the method that I was going for, I absolutely should have tested out the colors much sooner. Pretty much right before I did the expression studies, in order to make sure that I was happy with the values once I added color to them. I noticed that I liked the values that were in grayscale, but then when I added a color layer and started to experiment with adding colors, I wasn't really vibing with any of the palettes that I was coming up with, and the colors either felt really saturated or too pale. This definitely highlighted to me that I have a lot of work to do when it comes to sort of color theory and picking out colors. I've done a bit of practice in the past with understanding the basic patterns of like complementary colors and triadic color schemes, but putting them into practice, and especially finding skin tones, oh man, I really struggled with finding the right skin tone that I was happy with for Hetty. I would show the time-lapse, but it's just a bunch of flashing images, because it was a lot of switching around. But here are a couple of attempts at least. I do think it's still important to share that not everything works out the first time, and more of the full experience of designing a character, especially for the first time in this much depth. Things will go wrong, and that's okay. The first attempt doesn't have to be the perfect attempt. So in the end, I not entirely scrapped the values, but sort of redid them. I still wanted to keep the hierarchy of having the hat be the darkest value, then the hair, and then the skin tone. But I basically just brought all the values down to a much lower level. And if you look at a comparison between the two, the end result still has that hierarchy, but all of the colors feel a bit more punchier, and the contrast between them is a bit better as well. So I'm glad that I revisited the colors and adjusted them now before I went even further to do outfits and full body poses. This definitely should be something that I do sooner, and I will do for future character design projects. I eventually landed on a very forest-themed color scheme, with the dark reddish brown hair and a darker green hat. The hat, oh man, the hat took so many different turns of using different colors, but I think this one fits the best because she is someone who is very in tune with nature and spends a lot of time there. So having it almost like a camouflage in a way, or just a way to blend in, I think works quite well for what she does. With a couple of adjustments, here is what we have so far. Even with the hiccups at the end, I'm really happy with how this is going. Initially, I was really nervous about designing a character from scratch. Even with the studies that I did last week, it still felt like a daunting task, but breaking it down into just focusing on individual components, like the hair and then the accessories, has really helped a lot. Next week, we're going to be focusing on her full outfit, like her adventuring gear, creating some poses to add to this character sheet, and also her cat companion Vin. So I hope you look forward to that. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like portrait studies, check out this video here, where we do a few value studies of different portraits from references. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care out there. Goodbye!